listening to Bleeding Page Podcast. Join authors Chad Lutsky and Jason Brandt as they delve into writing and publishing the dark side of fiction.
All right, this is episode 17, right? And it's been a while. We had
you say that every time.
yeah, and we will probably continue to say that. I know you're very busy, and I'm busy myself. I'm sure not nearly as busy as you are. So,
well, I mean, I wasn't even home for half the summer, so
you were.
It's kind of hard to record episodes.
That's right. I think between the last two, you have helped film a action film in Germany called The Last Kumite. Yep. I don't think we talked about that on the last episode. And
it's a writing podcast. I didn't write it, so.
Well,
but yes, I was in Germany for almost 5 weeks, so it's kind of hard to keep up with this kind of stuff when you're in another country.
This episode, and we'll probably I would love to, when we started the podcast, we were doing like bi-weekly, I think it was. People were digging it, man. I still get messages and comments and stuff asking like people that I don't know. They're like, I really get a lot out of your podcast. I've gotten a lot of comments or messages that say that our podcast is their favorite when it comes to writing. So that's cool because I think we do something a little bit different, and we like to talk, when talking about a little bit about the writing process, more about making money after you're done, promoting and marketing. And tonight we talked with Travis Baldree, who lightning struck him big time when he self-published his book, and it became eventually a New York Times best-selling piece of work.
And as everyone's about to hear, he doesn't like to take credit for it, but I always say that luck looks an awful lot like hard work, and this man put in the work to release a book at the right time, in the right way. And, could he have ever predicted this to happen? No. But he really nailed the process in releasing this. Yeah. And he's reaping the benefits, and it's cool to see. Yeah,
big time. You can tell he's a very, very hard worker, no matter what he's doing. I've got his little intro here, but he's the author of the low-stakes cozy fantasy New York Times bestselling Legends and Lattes. The prequel for this, called Bookshops and Bone Dust, comes out November 7th, I think he said. He is also a very sought-after audiobook narrator and the CEO, co-owner of Double Damage Games, where he was responsible for developing the games Torchlight, Fate, and Rebel Galaxy. We didn't talk too much about that kind of stuff tonight. We just talked about what happened, the ride that he's been on with Legends and Lattes. I read it earlier this year. Not something I usually write. Really enjoyed it. This is, if you are hating Stephen King's new book Holly because of all the COVID mention, you think it's too soon and you want some escapism, something lighthearted, this would be your thing. Fantasy's not usually my thing. Cozy's not usually my thing, but I actually did really enjoy this, and I'm definitely going to read the prequel. So let's get into our discussion with Travis Baldree.
Get a lot written today?
Yes.
Travis Baldree, thanks for joining us. You are the outlier, I guess. As I was just telling you, we normally have, Joe Lansdale, Josh Malaman, Hunter Shea, creature feature guys, horror guys, gritty crime stuff. And now we have a cozy fantasy author. And I know that doesn't want to be, I know you don't want to be eventually known just for that. I could tell by...
I would have assumed I was much more likely to write the genres that you normally talk about.
Yeah.
Because that's certainly what I have been historically most interested in. And it's a lot of the kinds of things that I read. And if you had told me before I did this that I was going to write a cozy fantasy, I would have said you were insane. So,
well, I'll tell you, I saw the cover of, and I'm going to flash it on here again, but Legends and Lattes right here, New York Times bestseller. And I saw the cover of this maybe a year and a half ago, I can't remember the timeline, but I remember seeing it. It was before you were picked up by a traditional publisher. I saw the
Yep.
cover. I
So
read,
there's like a 3-month window there. Yeah.
yeah, I saw it, and I don't normally read fantasy. I've read like Tolkien and a few World of Warcraft novels, but that's pretty much it. I don't have anything against it. It's just it hasn't been something that I've set the time
Sure.
aside to write or to read. I saw this cover and I'm like, what is this and why am I attracted to this? Because I could tell it wasn't your average, fantasy thing. I saw the tagline, I read the synopsis, and I thought this is going to take off. I don't know who this guy is, but this is going to pioneer a new niche that's going to have people copying it for the next decade. And I know that you have expressed before that you don't feel you've really started anything that wasn't already there.
Yeah, definitely not.
But you've certainly put the in the spotlight, and I really do think that as a result, there's going to be clones, much the same way that like Twilight brought all these paranormal romance books. I think that we're going to see cozy fantasy a lot in the next.
I don't think you have to look very far already.
Yeah. Well, you're
and I think
probably
it's
right.
really just all the lenses came into focus so that people identified it as what it is. I think that the cover, the concept, the timing in the middle of COVID when people are actually seeking out comfort food, basically, I think just basically it just clarified to people what that genre is from all of the examples that already existed before, but maybe weren't as specifically identifiable, especially I think that we're at as like a time where people are watching things like Critical Role, where like Dungeons and Dragons is just everybody and their mom knows what it is, where people played World of Warcraft for a decade and a half. And there's just sort of like an intersection of that kind of comfort with, more human, regular, everyday comforts that, I don't know. I definitely think it's been done before, but I do think the cover and the pitch clarified it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it felt like the perfect time. Like we needed this kind of thing, and we were looking for, which is strange. It's quite the opposite of probably one of all of our favorites in here, Stephen King's new book, which just dives into COVID and mask wearing and vaccinations, and a lot of readers right now are just like, dude, I want escapism. I don't want to go back. That's too soon. I don't want to go back into that right now. It's funny that you mentioned World of Warcraft because, I played that game for like a neck deep addiction for probably the first 6 years it was out, from open beta until, the first like 6 years. Now, about once a year for about a month, I log in and I dink around and I have fun, and then I'm done for another year. And just this past week, I did that because they had launched a new hardcore server for Classic WoW, and I thought, oh, once you die, you die. I like that concept. I like the intensity of that. So I spent the weekend playing, most of the week, and while I was playing, I listened to every interview on YouTube I could find of you that was done in the past year. So,
I'm so sorry.
No, I wanted to apologize to you because I know that you're going to be talking about stuff that you've said, and I've been in your shoes where you're rehashing the same stuff or asking some of the same questions. But so apologies for that.
That's okay. We'll try and take it off road. We'll try and make it new.
Yeah, I agree. But I did want to dive into the story behind, what got you from, because I think that a lot of people don't realize that you had, independently published this book initially. So can we talk about that?
Whose dog needs a Benadryl hot dog?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'll let Travis talk about his what happened, and I will mute myself.
So as far as independent publishing goes, bye-bye, dog. I primarily published this after I wrote it because I wanted to go through the process that I have seen other authors that I work with go through. So I'm a full-time audiobook narrator at this point in my life after being a video game developer for decades. And so I work with a lot of independent authors. And having actually finished a book for the first time for National Novel Writing Month back in 2021, of course, I'm going to publish it. I'm going to go through these steps. I like to learn stuff. I'm technically minded, and that was just something I obviously knew that I was going to do. But I didn't do it with the expectation of like pursuing a degree or a career as an author or pursuing traditional publication at all. It was really just to get it done and treated like a professional production, even if nobody actually read it. So I went through a traditional rigorous edit with an author friend of mine. We bartered. I narrated an audiobook for her, and she went through an edit for me. I learned Vellum after evaluating every ebook production application that is known to man and despising all of them. And I went through gathering all the information I needed about, how ISBNs functioned and how Ingram worked. Because I was like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to make sure that I can go down to my local indie bookstore and ask them to order a copy, and they won't give me a really long-suffering look when they discover it's only available on Amazon. So I went ahead and did all of those things, and I commissioned cover art for it. I have a lot of experience commissioning cover art, so I knew exactly what I wanted, and I know how to commission art. So that was really useful. And I just went through the entire production process. It took about, I want to say 2 months, because it was over Christmas, and we took a good month and a half to do the edit. We did it very slowly, like a chapter or two at a time, because I wanted to internalize all the editorial notes that I was getting and then pre-edit and incorporate that into my knowledge of, things that I did wrong and things that I did right. Anyway, I was getting close to publication time, and I tossed the cover art up, which is probably roughly around the time that you saw it. And Seanan McGuire saw it and retweeted it and said nice things about it, not having read the book. And there was a sudden swell of interest because I think the cover really does articulate the appeal of the book really, really well.
100%, yeah.
And I already had everything up on KDP for doing an ebook publication. And after talking to some authors I knew about pre-order timelines and what the ideal was, most agreed it was like 2 weeks or so. I stretched it to 3 because I figured I have this swell of interest. I might as well just capitalize on it when anybody cares about this book at all. So I did that, and then the pre-orders went really well. And again, I've got kind of like a sort of feeling of dread that somebody's actually going to read this book and they're going to hate it. So I did just a Google form for getting ARC readers, and sent out about 100. I started getting early Goodreads reviews on Goodreads and getting responses back from my ARC readers. I had a pretty good ARC completion rate. I don't remember what the final numbers were, but it was much more than I expected. And generally the feedback was really positive, much more positive than I expected again. So then the book came out and it did really well. And Seanan McGuire actually read it and then said, oh, you remember that book I looked at that I thought had a cool cover? Well, actually, I read it and I really loved it. And I think all of those things combined, and then a snowball started to build with TikTok and YouTube and influencers just in general, basically pushing the book for me. And then around about that time, the Ingram Spark version that I generated for print came online and was suddenly available to be distributed to bookstores because I had brick and mortar asking me if they could get the book. And all of a sudden it started showing up in bookstores. And then it started showing up in Barnes & Nobles because Barnes & Noble booksellers started doing an end run around the print-on-demand restrictions at Barnes & Noble. I discovered that they have a neat trick that they can use to do that. And then it started proliferating in Barnes & Nobles, and I could watch it do it. It would blossom in little clusters of Barnes & Nobles, like across my state. And then I started checking other states, and I was just it was obvious that it was lightning strike stuff. That, I told someone before, it's like holding a bucket under a rain cloud and wanting to fill it up. And all you can do is make sure the bucket doesn't have any holes in it, but you can't control anything else. So
yeah,
I just happened to have a bucket with no holes in it. And then when it moved on to the traditional publishing end of things, maybe I should shut up for a second rather than monologuing for your entire podcast.
No. Get the story out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going. All right. So at that point, agents started reaching out to me. And I had no inkling that I would do such a thing and had never thought about doing traditional publishing at all because, again, self-pub worked great. It was successful and I had absolute control, so I just didn't think about it. And I wasn't going to do a submission process or something. I didn't have time for that. But when agents reached out to me, and more than one, I kind of stopped and said, okay, well, when am I ever going to have this chance in my life to evaluate, A/B test what the difference is between self-pub and trad-pub on the same book? It feels like what a unique opportunity to see how those two things measure up. So I thought, well, what the hell? I'm not trying to quit my job and become a full-time writer. I like my job. And I can, if it's a disaster, I can always just go back to my cave and do what I do every day anyway and read other people's books out loud, which I enjoy. So I said, sure, because, I mean, at just the agent level, there's no real risk, right? You're just going to ask him to flog your book for you. So I chose my agent purely based on vibes because I had no idea what else to choose an agent on. Her name's Stevie.
That's
she works for Xeno in the Xeno agency in the UK, and I just thought she was really cool. I got along with her really well, and it just felt like we understood each other, and her expectations for how many books I needed to write and what I needed to do vibed with my thoughts about it. It was kind of low pressure. So she took it out, and within, I think, 48 hours, Tor had come back with the preempt. And I've always liked Tor because I think Tor treats their books well. I think they make good covers. I think they have a variety of content. They're usually well edited. I just respect them as a publishing entity. So I was like, well, that sounds pretty cool. And it was a really good offer. So at that point, I'm like, well, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, I'm going to do it. And I accepted. And then I just started to learn about the publishing industry, which I know very little about now, more than I did, but I knew nothing about it at the time. The first thing I learned is that there's more than one Tor. I had no idea this was the case. I was acquired by Tor UK. Tor UK is not the same as Tor US. They're totally different entities. They're both owned by Pan Macmillan, but they are totally different staff. The number of people at Tor US is probably like 100 or something. The number of people at Tor UK is 3. So the scales of these companies are very different.
What?
And
really?
Yes, they're in the Macmillan building, so they take advantage of other services that Macmillan offers. But as an imprint, they're like, it's 3 people inside of that building.
Huh.
Which is bonkers.
That makes me wonder. I submitted a book to Tor Nightfire, and it sat there for 15 months, and I'm like, what? How many they got? 2 people over there reading these, or what? And I ultimately pulled it and then signed with a different publisher and did a limited hardcover thing, but as well. But now I'm wondering if Tor Nightfire did only have 2 people.
I'm not sure how many people are in Tor Nightfire because, I mean, I'm sure they're under the auspices of Macmillan in New York, but I don't know how all the sub-imprints all break down as far as staff and how many work for each one. It's kind of a big black box. And so I'm just learning about all this. And I'm learning about foreign rights sales, and I'm learning about translations, and I'm learning about how your royalties accrue when foreign rights are sold. So for instance, my Tor US publication for Legends and Lattes is foreign rights because I sold to the UK. So actually all the money flows to the UK first through my agency and then back to me. Anyway, this was all just news to me, and it's just been really interesting to learn about it. And I had my concerns about the switch. My biggest concern was I'm anal retentive, I'm controlling, I'm particular. I like to have control over what I do. And I've worked for myself for a really long time. So that's a difficult thing to give up. I've worked for myself for, I don't know, 20 years at this point. So I worried that the relationship that I would have with the publisher would be very kind of arm's length, that they would be their way or the highway. And then I was really pleasantly surprised. Like, I actually really enjoyed working with everybody I worked with. And at the same time, I understand that I'm kind of in a unicorn position, that the book did really well, so it's going to get more attention than it might otherwise. So I'm aware that I'm incredibly privileged in the relationships that I have, but my experience has been very positive. Like, I've never been given like an ultimatum about anything. Everything is always very discussed, and my opinion is valued, and I make suggestions and they'll take them. For instance, I own the cover artwork to my books. The second book even, which was published first by Tor. It didn't make the self-pub transition. They used my same artist. They allowed me to be involved in the cover process, and I actually own the art. So if it ever goes out of print, I'm not out my cover art.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway, my relationship has been great. I really love my editors. I love I love the entire team. They're just really nice people that care a lot about books and are very, very communicative. So I honestly can't say enough nice things about them, even though I know I'm also in a weird, lucky position where I get to have that privilege of their attention, I think.
Wow. It's just a wild story to go from not having written a book to doing foreign rights.
I mean, I think there's... I think I have several advantages coming into this that mean that I have more run up than somebody who just has never written a book before. One, I've tried to write a book a lot, and I've written shorts and I've written novellas. I never published anything, never bothered.
Oh, okay. So
but I've always liked writing. I've always liked writing. I've always been interested in it. I've always wanted to do it. I just never made it to a full novel before this one. And also, I think being in the audiobook industry, you're not in the industry unless you care about words and books and stories. And I think there is a really unique opportunity that you have as an audiobook narrator to really crystallize your specific discernment about books and stories and what you particularly want to write. That doesn't mean it's like objectively good or bad, but I think that I flailed around as a younger writer a lot, trying to identify what I really thought about writing and not just putting things in because I'd read them in another book. You know, I feel like I see this a lot in books. It's like when somebody says that somebody let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. They didn't put that in there because that's their unique thought about the book. It's just like, well, that's a thing that goes in books, so I'm going to put it in. Yes. And I think for me, there was a lot of that. And reading books of variable quality out loud really, really clarifies for you what you actually think, which is really cool. And apparently what I think is not particularly ambitious. Apparently what I think is, I'm going to use some fantasy characters and we're going to open a coffee shop and it's going to be like the Great British Bake Off. But it's my specific feeling and thought at that point in time, you know, regardless of its worth.
It sounds like your story, kind of like Josh Mallerman or the Hugh Howeys, that it sounds like a lightning strike lottery winning out of nowhere, like you won the lottery out of nowhere. It wasn't just, oh, this just happened. You were working on similar things for years and developing these skills. So it wasn't just like it happened overnight.
Yeah.
I mean, it absolutely is a lightning strike, but I was shielded enough to not be burned to a crisp by it. I mean, I was able to be in the right position when the lightning struck. So I just can't take credit for anything except I think I made a basically okay book. I don't think it's terribly flawed. I think it does what it set out to do, but I don't think it necessarily warrants the success that it has. I think that's just a quirk of timing that I did not predict and had no foresight into choosing. I did not sit down to write this saying, this is what the world needs, and I'm really going to take advantage of this moment. So I can't pretend that I had any of that foresight. The only foresight I had was realizing what I wanted at that time, and other people just happened to want it, is like the luck element.
Yeah.
The fact that you had 100 ARC readers for your first novel tells me that you were way smarter about releasing this book than even most very seasoned writers are. I mean, you had a lot of foresight into this. That's very impressive.
I mean, I think I was definitely basically competent about all the things I did. I didn't fumble around. I know how to learn things. I know how to gather information. I spent years as an engineer. Weirdly, a lot of those skills are useful for doing this sorts of thing. I had familiarity with the indie book industry just from like the contact of doing audiobooks. So years and years of doing that, you get a certain amount of like absorbed insight into what those authors are going through. And so I definitely was able to capitalize on all of that. And also I knew other authors. I could ask them questions like, hey, which ebook layout tool is the least awful? And how long should a pre-order be? And what about your pricing? You know, and should I bother with Kindle Unlimited? And I had people I could ask these questions. So it's hard to overstate the value of that too, just knowing people and being around those things.
That's amazing, man. That's really cool. Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
Even just, and I was thinking about this when I heard that you were like the first interview that I think I watched my first interview with you way earlier this year after I read Legends and Lattes, because I was real curious about, I just often do that. I'm curious about the author themselves. And when I found out that you were a narrator, I was like, oh, okay. So he's been sitting back and whether consciously or subconsciously being like, don't like that. I do like this. I kind of putting this stuff together. That works for me. And then all of a sudden you're like, it's almost like a little bit. It reminds me of when I went to when I had a English class in like a writing class in college. I was horrible at it. Now, granted, I never read. I hated reading. Like I would not read books. Too preoccupied with skateboarding and bands and stuff like that. So I read my first novel when I was like 23, 24 years old. And then I just read all the time. Yeah. So, but when I was at in this class, I sucked at it. And then once I started once I started reading and I read a lot, then all of a sudden I could write. It taught me more about writing than that class ever did. And so
yeah,
it kind of reminds me of, what I can't imagine all of the, even when I started writing, I remember thinking early on, I'm going to read bad stuff and really good stuff. The bad stuff so that I know what not to do. And I still kind of encourage people to do that, but not too much. You only need to read so much of the garbage before you realize that, okay, this isn't helping. The bar's got to be set high and I need to, otherwise you're going to be right. You're going to go have the bar down here and just write. So yeah, I find that interesting and I could see how that would just help so much, and be an advantage, to just kind of like almost be like a fly on the wall, just taking it all in.
Yeah. Well, there's a critical thing about reading out loud, which is that you can't skim and you can't like soft pedal what's going on in the book. If you're reading to yourself and you're not really interested in a paragraph, your eyes you kind of glaze a little bit. You sort of skate through it. If there's pages where nobody's talking and you're not interested in the world building that they're dumping on you for 10 pages, you just you glaze through it, and that gets minimized in your mind. You don't notice exactly how much you didn't like it. And a lot of times the things that are really good, you don't actually even recognize how good they are when you're reading them because somebody talked to you or there was a weird sound or actually you're thinking about work and you're just kind of making it through this chapter. The humor didn't even land. There was a joke there and you didn't quite get it. And if you read out loud, you can't do any of that, especially if somebody's paying you to do it. You have to basically digest and interpret what the author's trying to do at every point. And you can also see when they're struggling. And you kind of learn how to get out and push, which involves that recognition of what they were trying to do and what's the gap between what you wanted and what actually was there. And what would happen to close that gap? What would I have to do? And all you have at your disposal as a narrator is tone and pace and cadence, and you can make up some ground with that. But you also recognize, even as you're doing that, what you could have done if you could have changed the words. That sounds really, really pretentious. But again, this is all like a personal observation. It's just what you think about it. It's not like objective. I mean, there are objective things. When people misuse words or have a comma splice or whatever, and it interrupts the flow, you're like, okay, yeah, that's just wrong. But it's unbelievably powerful. And there's a second component to it. I mean, I don't know if you've both just heard the really common refrain that if you want to edit your work, you read it out loud.
Oh, yeah, I do it every book. I do it every book.
It's very common advice. So a thing that happens if you read other people's work out loud for thousands of hours is that your mental voice becomes incredibly clear. And it also happens in advance because a lot of what you do when you narrate is you are predicting what's going to happen in a sentence because you haven't read it. You're pre-scanning and judging where things are going to go. So you have a very, very clear version of your own reading and narrative voice and dialogue in your head before you've even said the words. And it turns out that that also happens when you write. that you get that pre-filtered narrative voice in your head, which really clarifies tone and pace, the beat of a sentence, how this comma is going to land when you put it here, and how dialogue is going to read, how naturalistic it's going to be when it comes out. And I found that amazingly valuable. And the difference to me from the writing that I did before I was a narrator and the writing after, that became really, really clear to me because I can see it at work. Man, if there was like some superpower thing you could do as a writer to make your life easier, it feels like reading other people's work out loud for thousands and thousands of hours would be one of the ways to do it, if it just wasn't so time consuming.
You just sold me on it. I want to start reading books out loud now. Like, that just totally clicked for me. I got to do that.
It's so cool for dialogue. It's so cool for dialogue. It's amazing because I remember writing dialogue and being like, why is that wrong? Why doesn't that sound like that character anymore? And then having to go figure that out. And when you can hear their voice really clearly before it hits the page, it's just, oh God, it makes things so much easier. You can see people struggle with this as an author if they're trying to write in dialect, and you see them like dropping syllables or trying to do stuff and they do it wrong. They're like, I'm going to write this like a Scottish person would say it, and it's wrong. And then you try and say that out loud and discover, nope, that's not how Scottish people talk. But if you know what that voice is supposed to sound like, you don't make those same mistakes because you already know what it needs to be. There's not that disconnect.
Huh.
You just need to make some babies, Jason, then you'll have an excuse to read out loud every night.
Yeah. I used to read to my wife years and years ago.
Yeah, I don't think my wife would like that very much. I wouldn't blame her. I tried narrating one of my books once, and I am the worst actor of all time. I always have been, and that just solidified it more for me. I cannot act.
It's a developable skill. I have no acting background. None. I was not even a theater kid. I just got nothing. So it's a developable skill.
I mean, if there was like a negative trait for acting, I have it. I did a couple commercials in college. I mean, I am bad. It's
-12 thespian.
Yeah, I am really horrible. I wanted to ask you a little bit kind of on the business side. You go from being a full-time narrator to this book blowing up. What does that do for your production schedule? Are you struggling to keep up with everything? I mean, that's a lot.
It's a disaster. It's a disaster. So I'm really fortunate as a narrator. I have a lot of work. When I signed this book, I think I was already booked out into 2026. So I had like 200 and something books on the schedule.
Oh my God.
So this was not something I planned for. And I'm a prolific narrator. I narrate about, on average, probably about 850 hours a year, which is a lot. It's usually, 70-ish hours a month, which is a lot.
Do you edit yourself, or do you?
I do, because I'm a nerd. This is another one of those weird influences. So I wrote the plugin in the software I use that lets me do punch and roll. And I have like an editorial style that lets me fix sound. If something bumps, I can fix it while I'm recording without going and re-listening.
Dang.
And I've got a proofer dedicated that she always is turning. Anyway, yeah. So I have kind of like this vertically integrated sort of production process. But it was not a glimmer in my eye that I would be doing this. And so it's been a challenge. And there's been a lot of reprioritizing from me. And in some cases, I've had a series where I'm like, okay, I just can't do this one anymore. And I find other narrators. And in some cases, I've refunded an author and said, hey, look, keep everything you've made from this book. Obviously, it's you own the audio, but I can't continue with this series. But I would pay you back. I would refund you your recording fees just so that you can re-record it with another narrator for consistency, because people hate it when you switch narrators in an audiobook series. It's just, you have kind of you really are kind of making a bit of a pact with an author when you take on their series that you're going to narrate it through to the end and not leave them hanging, because it sucks so bad if you don't.
Yeah.
So there's been a few cases where I've had to offload work. And I'm just trying to adjust overall my schedule so that I'm maybe 60 to 70% of the audio that I did prior, so I have enough time every year to write without it being after working all day, which is how I've written the last 2 books.
Is there a genre, you don't have to name names or anything, just blink once for yes and no for twice. Or, now, is there a genre where you know, it's on your docket or whatever, and you just kind of roll your eyes and you're like, oh, frick, man, I do not want to do this.
I don't think it's ever a genre, because I think you can write something good in every genre. There's definitely books that are not my favorites to narrate. You don't get to narrate your books that you enjoy all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just, all right, how deep do we want to go on this? At a very surface level, I prefer books that have like some human concern. I mean, I think you can write a book that's just a bunch of events and people doing things, and a lot of people want that. It passes the time. But I would rather that the characters change and there's something that is human and relatable, whether it be horror or sci-fi or fantasy or lit fic or whatever. And sometimes you get books that don't have that. They're just events happening and people marching through, and more or less everybody's the same at the book as they were at the end, in the end as they were at the beginning. And those are not my favorite because I can't emotionally attach to them. Also, especially if you're writing indie fiction, there's like a vast array of approach to indie fiction now, especially now that there's serialized works that actually make a ton of money. You have, I don't know, are you aware of Royal Road? So Royal Road is a website for serialized fiction. It's largely fantasy, sci-fi, and a lot of lit RPG and Chinese progression fantasy translations. And a lot of it's power fantasy stuff, a lot of real power fantasy stuff. But these things go on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of chapters and millions of words. There are authors, there's one who's known for doing, like on a good week, like 60,000 words in a week. So they're vast. And what they do after they have gained a large following and they have a lot of readership and the books get really, really long is they start lopping pieces off of them and then publishing them as actual ebooks and audio, which are usually maybe 250,000 words a pop. And these aren't like normal story. I mean, there's stories, but they don't function like normal stories. It's like the difference between a movie and a long-running. It's like watching Supernatural or watching like a movie, right? They're different. They have different approaches to story. A lot of TV series are like about kind of keeping characters sort of where they are. Maybe you've got some big overarching plot, but more or less we're kind of treading water with little stories that maintain the status quo because people want to ship these two characters or people like these people where they are. And so in a lot of ways, these stories incorporate those elements. I like concise short stories that get to the point and leave their characters changed at the end. So that's not my natural inclination to read. And I read a lot of that. The other thing that I usually run up to in fiction that is not my favorite is inflation for time. Because about a year and a half ago-ish, all of the authors figured out that if your audiobook is over 20 hours on Audible, you get an extra $2 per copy. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden, word counts for books that might have been 15 hours all need to suddenly be 21 or 22. But the story didn't necessarily change. We just found a way to make the same story tip over into being at least 20 hours of audio because of that extra $2 a copy, because audio is so big in a lot of those genres. And that's not a trend that I appreciate either, because I like a story to have what needs to be in it and nothing else. That's just like my personal preference. So I've answered this in a really roundabout way. I don't mind. I like every genre, but those are like the things that are not that's what determines what I like, whether I like something or not.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And I'm guessing as a narrator, you read mostly fantasy, right? If that's what you're known for, is that what most of your offers come in for?
You read a lot of fantasy, a lot of lit RPG. If you're not aware of it, lit RPG is like it's fiction that is usually either that has some underpinning that relates to gaming, like either like an actual systemic thing, like people actually have skills and level up and points and what have you, or it's like set in a game or whatever. And this is really popular right now because you get to take all of the fantasy elements and you get to use them in kind of like an anachronistic way because the characters are all modern and people that you would recognize and speak like people you would recognize. So you get to you get to kind of have your cake and eat it too, as far as fantasy goes. People really like it, especially people who grew up with games. Where was I going with this? I've totally forgotten where I was going with this while I was
I was just
explaining it.
asking about if you mostly read fantasy or
Yeah,
RPG.
I read a lot of that. I read
Sure.
a lot of that. Just spec fic in general. I mean, I occasionally get the odd other thing. I would like to read more, but what happens in audiobooks is that if you read something that's successful, other authors who are writing similar fiction go, that audiobook was successful. I want that narrator to do mine because mine is close. It's like a comp. So I find myself doing a lot of really similar stuff.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense. When I look for narrators, I'm always looking for people who've read horror, so.
Which is what I thought I was going to be narrating. I was convinced that I was going to be narrating like thrillers and horror. That's the genres I thought I would be in. Because I thought it would just fit my voice. But that's just not where I ended up.
I mean, it worked out. You're a New York Times bestselling author for the genre. So.
Well, and I don't get to narrate anything like what I wrote. One of the reasons I wrote it was because I don't get to narrate anything like that. And all the stuff I was reading was like high stakes, white bread dude killing gods and demons and getting super powerful. And I was like, I've had enough. I just want to read something that makes me feel good for a couple of minutes.
Did you narrate your own book?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I was wondering if that was common or
Yeah.
not.
I don't think there's a lot. There are narrators that write, but I think there's probably more authors that narrate or try to.
Okay. I just wanted to circle back because I'm so curious about what your schedule looks like now. Is your inbox just overflowing or like your Twitter DMs, like you're just never going to get caught up?
So I stopped taking new audiobook work for like 9 or 10 months ago because I just didn't want to extend the schedule any further. I got to catch up to where I am. But there's been, I was really good about keeping my email inbox empty until like a few months ago. I just hit like a critical mass of like every day there's a thing, a request for this. Can you do this? Can we go there? Can we do this project? Can you blurb this? Can you read this arc? And it was like I'm just barely hanging on.
Is it hard for you to say no? I know a lot of authors are just like, oh, I just do everything. I'm like, don't do that.
Very hard to say no. I'm learning, but it's really, really difficult. Partially because I feel like I was very fortunate, and I know there are so many authors who are much more talented and accomplished than I am that should have had that kind of lucky break. And you're just very cognizant of the fact that you've basically been given something that you don't deserve, and you feel the need to make sure that you are properly grateful by passing that on in whatever way you possibly can. If somebody asks me questions, I never ever leave an email unanswered. I will never leave an email unanswered. So
I can relate to that. So I get so many messages a day now, but mine wasn't like very quick like yours. Mine's been like over 2 years. It's been building and building and building, and now it's a huge portion of my time is responding to email and DMs from people. Mm-hmm. And I'm the same way. I said I will always reply to somebody who sent me something, but I'm right at the point where I'm realizing I don't know that I can keep doing that and actually get work done.
It's really hard. So
it's brutal.
My approach to some of this has been to collect a bunch of information and make it publicly available in a way that I can direct people to. So I wrote up my entire publishing everything. It's like, I don't know, it's probably 10,000 words. And it's everything from the actual writing process to getting your ISBNs from Boker to how KDP and Ingram Spark function to like graphs of data to how you actually find and commission cover art and what you can do when laying out your cover art to make sure that the cover art is placed right to make room for your text, and whether you should do an audiobook, and if you do, how that process actually works and whether it's worth your time and your money. And so I wrote up a big thing and I send people to it. And I found that the more ways I have to do that, the better. I already had a big bunch of videos and stuff for audiobook production because I also get asked audiobook questions. And it saves me a lot of time to not answer the same questions in text, but to say, hey, I already answered it and here it is.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I like that a lot. I have responses that, because there's a certain celebrity that when he does something, everyone sends me messages about, and they're all the same thing. So I just have like a copy paste for like 50 of them in a row because it's all the same question. So I can totally relate. Maybe I should make a web page that just says, yes, I've seen this, and just send them to that.
You need a flow chart. Yeah, just if, it's like one of those automated answering things that says, if you need to talk to Department A, then.
So are you getting to a point where you're going to have to bring somebody on to help you manage all this?
I have thought about it, but I have not figured out a way to do so, because it's so dependent on my schedule, and my schedule is already so dense, and I don't know how I could. I feel like currently the amount of time it would take for me to communicate to someone and to coordinate would remove any benefit I had in like time savings, because I would do it if I could. But, and some of it's even just like physical stuff. Like I need to take these book plates down and mail them. I need to take these tip-ins and go put them, DHL them to the UK or whatever. So I almost need somebody who would be local and willing to answer my email and had really deep knowledge of my calendar. And I don't know how you find somebody like that.
Yeah.
So my solution is mostly just to try and take the pedal off a bit on all of the audio stuff until I get enough room to live normally.
Are you the kind of guy who will push yourself just nonstop until you completely burn out?
Oh, yes, absolutely. 100%. And it's a bad habit I carry over from game development, because that's the way game development works.
Sure.
For a while, I was doing pretty good when it was just audiobooks. I was like, oh yeah, when you're a narrator, there's only so many hours you can work in a day because your voice burns out. So I can produce about 3 hours of finished audio a day, which is like 5 to 6 hours of work, depending on the complexity of the book. But you just can't go beyond that, or you lose your voice and then you're out of work for a bit. But now that I write too, all the limits are off. My governor has been removed, so
welcome to hell.
Yeah. Well, and honestly,
very successful hell.
It's weird because writing is easily the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Like personally rewarding. Game development was good to me. I got a lot out of it, but it's really brutal, and the relationship with the audience is antagonistic. That's just not, I don't think, a really positive relationship once games move past kind of like the enthusiast era. And I don't think the game industry has done like a particularly good job of setting boundaries. So, it's not the best. Audiobooks are actually really positive. If somebody doesn't like an audiobook that you narrate, they give it 1 star and they get on with their life and they forget you exist. But also as a narrator, you're really just putting frosting on somebody else's cake. It's not you. You get to add something to it and personalize it, but it's not at bottom you. But the book is you. And if somebody relates to it and tells you they relate to it, it's just frankly one of the coolest things ever. If somebody comes up to me and tells me that like that book got them out of a reading slump, or shows me the tattoo they got, or sends me a piece of fan art, or just tells me that they were in a really dark point in their life and it just made their day better, that's like unbelievably powerful. And I was not prepared for how cool that was. So writing that book was easily the most positive thing I've ever done in my life. It was not as easy as narrating a book, but...
I wonder if with it being a cozy style book, if that gets you a lot more messages like that, oh, this really helped me relax and it made me, I had a bad day.
I think it has to contribute. I think that writing anything, if you've got some kind of human experience in there and somebody connects to it and they're like, oh man, that character is just really, I just love that character or whatever. It can be in any genre. But I do think that if people liked this book, by and large, you kind of filtered yourself to a certain sort of audience, right? That wanted this and is ready for this and is in the mind for this, which is generally a more positive kind of vibe. So maybe that would be dramatically different if I had written like a breakout horror novel or something. I don't know. I just don't have enough experience to know
about my books.
That's interesting. That's interesting I'm sure because I understand what Jason's saying about maybe are you getting these types because of what you have written, but the emails, the messages that I've received the most about something is the darkest thing that I've written that has no happy ending and the least hope out of all of my books. But it's been the one year after year. It's the one that I continually get messages. The type of messages that like make me tear up, where like, this book, you have no idea what it's done for me and my family, and this used to go like this, and now we've recovered from this and stuff like that. So, and it's like, really, this book needs to be taught in school. So I'm sure that he would get more because of that thing, but you would think that that'd be this book that I'm talking about would be the last one that people would be sending.
Well, how do you feel after you get those? I mean, how do you said it makes you tear up. It's a big deal.
Oh man, yeah, it's
the coolest thing ever.
It makes me feel so good. Yeah,
it's the coolest thing ever. I've done a lot of shit, and I've just never done anything that compared to that feeling.
Yeah, it's very cool. I feel the same way when I get a letter from like Russia or something like that. That whether I need to translate or whether it's broken English or whatever, it makes me feel so connected, I guess, to someone, because I didn't write this for them, but I feel like connected in a way, and it makes me feel I don't know. I don't get a ton of it. It's not like you guys, where I'm like, my inbox is just packed full and I've got to hire somebody, but it's there, and I get it from time to time.
It's just, my inbox is full, but it's not people being like, "Oh, your work changed my life." It's like, "Did you see what Steven Seagal did today?" You know what I mean? It's not like life-changing messages I'm getting.
I wish I got more "Did you see what Steven Seagal did today?" emails, because I think that would be actually a hoot.
It gets old. It actually gets pretty old. Chad, do you have any more messages before we let him go?
Only
messages?
That
did I say messages? Questions?
Yeah. Only that I wanted to brag that I am a pantser. I know that Travis wishes that he could, and I just wanted to also say that I don't like it. And how you wish you pantsed, I wish I could outline, and it takes the fun out of it for me. And it's I edit as I go, so it slows me down. Yes, I have a clean draft by the time I'm done, but I would much rather just spit everything out, have this, keyboard diarrhea, and get the first draft done, so that it gives me this drive to jump into the second draft and have. But I cannot do that, and I envy people who do it that way. And I wish that.
To me, it feels like laying bricks. Like, I know where I'm going and I have to but everyone just feels like a brick. It just always feels like work until the end. Yeah. And I hear from a lot of people who pants, who have kind of like this they seem like they're having a blast writing their first draft. And I don't know a lot who write that chaos draft that they now have to go turn into something. I don't envy them that part. But that feeling they get where they're just like, "Oh, I'm just having the best
don't know where you're going
freaking time doing this." I wish I got that, because that sounds great. But I'm just kind of laying the bricks. But then actually I enjoy an edit, because it feels like it's tucking in corners and tuning things up. And I don't feel like I have dramatic things that I have to tear apart and put back together. I hate redoing stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, I've heard you say many times that in almost in a comical, like, "Oh, they're so pretentious, these pantsers, and they think they're so special." So I just wanted to poke some
I'm
fun.
just jealous. I'm just jealous and maybe a little bitter about it, because I see them having such a freaking good time.
It is fun. It does make it feel less like a job. I've written by an outline. I had to do an outline before. I got paid for the whole thing. It wasn't like a ghostwriting gig, but it was writing in someone else's world. So I had to follow an outline that I had done, and it was just like, I already know, writing from A to B, then B to C, and then it's like I knew the whole way what was going to happen. Where when I'm pants, I wouldn't call it, what would you call it, the chaos? I don't know that I've heard that term before. I don't necessarily do that. I don't move on really if I don't have some
You're
kind
only
of
looking
direction.
so far into the fog, basically.
Yeah.
You're just looking a little ways ahead. I think it's what Terry Pratchett had described, like the way he writes, is he can see where he's going at the end, and he's standing at the brink of a big valley, and the valley is filled with fog, and he can see a few landmarks sticking up. So he knows these main things that have to happen, but then he just descends into the fog, and he doesn't know what's going to happen down there, which I always thought was kind of cool.
Only thing I wanted to mention too was Travis says that the prequel to Legends and Lattes coming out November.
November
October?
7th. November 7th.
Okay, November 7th, called Bookshops and Bone Dust.
Yep.
Okay. I thought about trying to reach out to your publisher and snatch a copy, but I didn't. But I will be buying it when it comes out because
I
I'm
figure we can
curious.
sort something out.
Did you you are going to write a third and then, right? Or
I'm contracted with
standalone?
Tor for 3 more books. I will write at least one more that's in this world. I like standalone books that interlock.
Yeah.
That's just kind of my preference because I just can't finish a series anymore. So there will be at least one more that's in the world. But I have other stuff I want to. I have like a sci-fi book I want to write. I have a really weird Americana fantasy I want to write. I like different stuff, and I don't want to spend my life writing the same thing.
Yeah, I hear you, man. That yeah. The only drawback to that, because that's what I do, is the only drawback to that is, yes, you might not know what you're getting, but your audience, for me anyway, my audience is so split that it broadens rather than having like this. Well, we know what we're going to get with this guy, and it's not like I'm writing romance under the same name and then, something that not that far out, but like horror and then gritty crime, which are can be adjacent and horror readers love the gritty crime, but still, it has a tendency to. I think I don't think it's worked well. Is finding
There's definitely
dangers
dangers to doing it. I mean, there's definitely dangers to doing it. My consolation to myself is that I think I can write other kinds of genre stuff in the same world too. That goes in different directions because it doesn't have to cling together into a singular narrative. And my hope is that I can have some fun with that. The second one I was going to write, which I didn't write, was going to be a mystery. So I was immediately going to break and have it be, okay, but it's going to be a mystery set in this world. Then it just turns out that I'm not Agatha Christie and I can't write a mystery. I suck at it.
Well, you not to take. I don't want you to take any kind of credit away from you've been very humble with your, like you think that some author might deserve but your book is written well. It's not a piece of garbage that you just happen to be standing next to a steel rod. It's I enjoyed it.
I appreciate that, and I'm proud of what I accomplished. But I'm also realistic about I'm realistic about what I accomplished, and I know that there's things that I would definitely like to do better. And I think it does what it does, and it mostly succeeds in its ambitions, which aren't huge, but that's okay.
I liked it, but dude, thanks so much for hanging out with us. You've been great. I had one more thing to say, but I can't remember what it was. Jeez.
Well, I just appreciate you coming on, man. It's been really insightful, and I love hearing the story, and I just love seeing people be successful, and particularly when they're taken off guard by it. And like I almost said the scramble because almost like it's a comedy, but like nobody expects when something like this happens, and it's just really cool to see when it does, and how gracefully you've handled it. It's very impressive.
Well, thank you very much, and I really had a blast on the podcast. This has been actually a lot of fun.